Before any strike is taken, there must be near certainty that no civilians will be killed or injured, the highest standard we can set. I profoundly regret what happened. On behalf of the United States government, I offer our deepest apologies to the families.
President Obama 2 years ago setting a tougher standard for U.S. drone attacks, but having to acknowledge this week an American strike killed 2 Western hostages, and we're back now with the panel. Julie, it was clear from a couple of appearances President Obama made the end of this week that he is, I don't think it's overstating it to say, anguished by this accident and the fact that 2 Western hostages, let's put their pictures up on the screen, American Warren Weinstein and Italian Giovanni Loporto, were killed in this U.S. strike on an al-Qaeda compound. What do you think of the chances that he will change U.S. drone policy dramatically as a result?
I think the chances of a dramatic change are pretty low. I think you may see some tweaks around the edges, but I think he's going to continue to use drones in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen. This has become so central to his foreign policy philosophy, to his fight against terrorism, that I think to see a major overhaul is really unlikely at this point. But I do think that this raises a question. When he said that we were not going to take strikes unless there was a near certainty that civilians would not be killed, how can you be sure of that? I mean, that is the question that I think the administration is going to have to answer, and it's going to be difficult for them to answer as long as they continue to try to keep so much of this program secret. Well,
we'll get to that in a moment. We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got a bunch on Facebook like these. Katie Coyle writes, what has happened to our intelligence agency? Why don't we have better intel? And Yvonne Horn sent this, how do you get information by killing everyone? Karl, I guess 2 questions. How do you answer them? How much do you fault the CIA for failing to know that these 2 hostages were in this compound? And are we doing enough to capture instead of kill terrorists who might give us better intel on what's going on?
Well, first of all, my understanding is there may have been 100 hours of surveillance of this facility, and they didn't detect the presence of these 2 hostages. This is what happens in war, and particularly when we're in a war in the territorial areas of Pakistan that are not under the control of the central government, in which we have very few assets. I would say this, I believe the president is right to pursue this drone policy, but I do think a mistake was made in changing an important policy that we had. The Joint Special Operations Command under McChrystal and Raven had policy of apprehending, detaining, and interrogating, and this administration ordered those responsibilities to detain and interrogate to be turned over to the Iraqis and the Afghans, and the amount of intelligence that we gathered as a result, my understanding is, dramatically dropped. So we got less information that, I don't know if we would have said there are 2 hostages there, but we're certainly getting less information by killing people and not detaining them and interrogating them.
And do you think part of that is because of this president's zeal to close Guantanamo?
Well, that's right. A part of it is that, because he stopped sending people to Guantanamo. And I understand what he said during the 2008 campaign, but he has found no way to close Guantanamo, and there needs to be a facility at which we can take people off of the battlefield and interrogate them. JSOC was doing it by not sending people to Guantanamo, but even that was ended.
Go ahead.
I don't know how in the world closing this loophole would have any effect on whether or not we know whether these drone strikes are going to be effective. I think anybody who has a problem like I do with this drone strategy still has a problem, and maybe more so the fact that the president promised that he was going to be transparent about this program, that we were going to have an honest debate about whether or not this is something we need to do and how we go about doing it. And he broke that promise, either because he knew at the time he was going to break that promise and he was just trying to put it off, or because he's incapable of leading his own administration to the place where he said he would 2 years ago. We found out today in the New York Times that literally the same person in the CIA that oversaw the torture program that a lot of people had a problem with, including me, also oversee the drone program. Why is it we have to wait for the New York Times to discover that? Why is that something that the administration is being honest about as they try to lead us into what is a very shadowy war where there's no obvious answer?
Ron, what is it you're asking for?
At least be honest with us. I want the President of the United States to keep his word. He said he was going to be transparent about why and how we conduct war from a robot in the air blowing people away. Some bad guys.
But when you say transparent, what is it you would like to know? I mean, we understand
the rules of engagement. How can we really? I mean, when the President of the United States says we're going to do it with a near certainty, I mean, really? I mean, how do you come up with near certainty? Is that just a talking point that you say 2 years ago, and then we find out that you can't do it? Let's put some meat on the bones, Mr.
It just
President.
seems to me that they probably had near certainty. What they didn't have was actual certainty, and that's always going to be the case. It seems to me there are two separate questions here. One is whether it's a wise policy to basically eschew this business of trying to capture these terrorists, these enemy, for interrogation purposes, and whether to kill some of them with drones. Now, the president seems to be all drones all the time now, but look, war is hell, and innocent people get killed in war. And if you're dealing with a ruthless enemy who doesn't play by the rules and keeps, captives in proximity to their fighters, some of this is going to happen. It's terrible that it does. It's a tragedy for the families. But the idea that we're going to now start to make known to the public all of our rules of engagement so that the enemy knows them as well, and disclose all of our war fighting plans in that way, it seems to me is crazy. This is a shadowy war, as Ron correctly pointed out. But it has to be a shadowy war because of the nature of the enemy.
But we don't have to give away all our secrets and all the rules of engagement to kind of have the transparent and honest debate that the president promised.
Well, let me ask you about.
I don't think a transparent or honest debate would have saved these lives.
Well, let me ask. No, but I suppose the argument is that it would have given more information to the American people. One of the things that's being
people support this program.
I understand that
overwhelmingly.
But let me ask you this: what about one of the things that's being talked about now is a fuller, clear, more specific accounting of civilian casualties as a result of this? Do you think that's good or unnecessary?
Well, I think that's all. That also gets us into murky territory because, again, many of these drone strikes take place in parts of the world where we don't have people on the ground and where we don't have allies with people on the ground. So a clear, there are fewer drone strikes in the Bush administration because it was a new technology, but I know even then there was difficulty in ascertaining exactly what happened in some of these places because it might be weeks or months before we ever got either people there or had people who had gotten there and reported back.
Do you buy that?
I buy it's not an easy thing, but I also buy the fact that the President of the United States made a lot of sense to me 2 years ago when he said that we can talk more openly about what we're doing and have an honest debate. And he either didn't mean it or he wasn't able to do it.
Well, it's one of those things that's easier to say, and then you actually get into the discussion about what you're going to make public, and suddenly intel guys, military guys are saying, well, we can't make that public, we can't make that public, and you're left with a pretty small pot.
That's what military and intel guys do. It takes a civilian government and a strong leader to say, you know what, this is the democracy, we can talk about what we're doing.
If we tried to fight World War II by the standards of perfection and perfect accuracy that are being sought now, we couldn't have fought the war. I mean, I've just been reading that long, wonderful history, Atkinson history of World War II. The number of mistakes and blunders is breathtaking, and yet we won the war, and everybody looks back on it as a good war.
All right. Thank you, panel. Good discussion. See you all next week.